Members, at the moment, I'm afraid we've just got a blank screen. We're there. Okay. Councillor Pickett, are you okay? Right, members, we're on item agenda 13, which you will find on page 30 of your papers, and that's the report of the Director of Mid-Kent Services Council Tax Reduction Scheme 2017 to 18. Would you like to lead us into that, Councillor?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members will be aware that arrangements for council tax reduction changed in 2013 when the scheme was localised. In localising the scheme, the position changed from being one where the cost was fully met by the Department for Work and Pensions to a partly funded scheme where the cost was met through the Revenue Support Grant. Since that point, there's been year-on-year reductions in the Revenue Support Grant, with the Council now finding itself in a position where the Revenue Support Grant will be removed altogether from April 2017, meaning that the full cost of the scheme, £8.8 million, will now be met locally by Maidstone Borough Council, Kent County Council and other preceptors. A cost to Maidstone Borough Council of around £1.3 million. The changes discussed within this report are aimed at helping to balance the cost of the scheme with the reduction in funding to ensure that we can provide support for those most in need whilst recognising the needs of the wider council taxpayer who now meets the cost. In terms of wider background for the recommendations, in June this year the committee considered a report setting out a number of options as to how the scheme could be reformed or how they could reform the council tax reduction scheme. Following consideration of those options, it was agreed that we should look to retain the current structure of the scheme and undertake a public consultation on potential changes. The consultation that followed identified 13 potential changes and was completed predominantly online, with details sent to 9,000 residents, as well as being publicised through the Gateway and other local stakeholders such as the CAB, Golding Homes and Social Services. The response to the consultation was positive, with 1,400 responses, over 300 of which were from households in receipt of council tax reduction. The results from the consultation, Appendix B within your papers, show at pages 74 and 75 that residents value the council tax reduction scheme and would like to see it continue, but not at the cost of other services or for increases to council tax. The consultation results therefore endorse the Council's broad approach to amending the scheme. Looking to the responses for each of the 13 options identified within the consultation, starting at page 44 within your pack, members will note that there is support across all options, with the proposed changes being the most favoured option in all instances, a view also shared by households receiving the reduction. The recommendation is therefore that the committee endorses the proposed changes, with the final decision to approve the scheme to be made by full council in December. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr McGuinness. I have no hand showing at the moment. Right, Councillor Harper.
I think because the recommendation refers to Appendix A, and from what the officer was just saying, I think Appendix A is what's on page 39 and page 40, which actually doesn't say Appendix A, so it needs to be just for clarity as to what we're agreeing and then asking Council to agree.
You're correct, it does start on page 39 and runs through to 41, I think you'll find. Yes, so it's 39 to 41. Councillor Garland.
Just a further point of clarity. In the list of options that are being suggested to be implemented or not, it says the average impact. Is that monthly, yearly or something else?
Mr McGuinness.
It's a weekly impact.
Garland, did you want to come back on that at all? All right, Councillor Firmer was...
Yeah, another really straightforward question. Where there's no data, wondered why, or that kind of thing. It's on, you know, sometimes you've got the figures, and then option 5, no data, and there's another one, option 11.
Sorry. Yeah, option 5 the council doesn't currently collect that data, so we can't identify how many people potentially would be affected by that or the value. And 11. Yeah. Option 11 relates to a future change. The work-related activity component is going to be removed from the benefit system from April next year.
Thank you. Yeah, on Citizen Advice Bureau it says that. Does that then mean that that's kind of, it doesn't matter because it's going to be removed anyway, or it doesn't matter what our decision is on option 11 then, or?
If it wasn't like...
Sorry. Oh.
It would have an impact if we wasn't to take a decision. In effect, the work-related activity component within our scheme acts to disregard the element within the employment support allowance. If the employment support allowance was to remove that component, but we were still to have a disregard, and there was an underlying entitlement to it, in effect we would be disregarding other income than what it was intended to.
Do you need that repeated?
Maybe, just so I can get it right. So this is it's being removed later from the general benefit system, and if we is that correct? And so if we decide now to remove it from our council tax reduction system, that would then fall in line with the general benefit system later on. Or if we decided not to remove it now, we would then be conflicting with the general benefit system in the future. Is that?
That's correct.
Councillor Garland, I have got you. I've got it written down. But I have Councillor McLaughlin next.
Thank you, Chair. To save me doing a lot of arithmetic, Steve, could you on 3.3, you say maintaining the current scheme, and presumably that means not increasing any of these levels of council tax, would require a saving of £157,000. Are you saying, in other words, that that the changes you're making in aggregate will come to 157,000? And the second part of the question is, what does that represent in terms of an increase in council tax across the borough?
In terms of the first part of the question, that's quite easy to answer. I may look to Mr Green to help me with the second part. The 157,000 is the cumulative saving across all the options if we was to implement all 13. I don't know, Mark, if you can help with the second question.
I can't give you a figure offhand. You need to look at it in the context of the overall amount of savings that we need to deliver, which is the 4.1 million. So in itself, it's not going to make a big difference to the council tax, but it's a contributor to all of the other things that we need to do to close that gap of 4.1 million.
I seem to recall that we could equate a 2% increase in council tax would mean something like 300,000 a year. I'm not sure if that figure's exact, and therefore this would represent a 1% increase in overall council tax. Are you not able to give a broad indication such as that?
Yes, that is a good rule of thumb to use if you want to. I can't give you an exact figure, but that 2% for 300,000 is a good rule of thumb, so you can see the impact of this on the overall council tax bill if we weren't able to make this this saving.
Councillor Borton.
Thank you very much. My mental arithmetic is not the best, to be totally honest, Steve. So I'd be grateful if you could maybe talk through how, if it is a weekly average impact, how that gets the savings for both for NBC, obviously, and perhaps KCC if it links into that as well for the options, because just a quick sort of mental arithmetic doesn't come out with the sums on the paper in front of me. And the second question I have is specifically with regards to option 6, reducing the capital limit from the existing 16,000 to 6,000. Now, when I look at the very colourful charts on page 56 and the text that goes with it, It goes, the comments in relation to this option are generally supportive, though some have suggested that £10,000 would be a more appropriate limit. Who are some?
In terms of the second question first, I mean, the comment is just to try and capture the kind of feedback that was received, rather than provide a kind of detailed response. It was kind of a general message that was coming through the kind of feedback section on the consultation. In relation to the mental arithmetic, I'm quite happy to. Was there a particular option that you were looking at? Okay.
Thank you. If we look at option 1 to start with, because that's obviously got £54,000 saving, and option 4, they're the two larger ones, so perhaps if someone could just talk me through those figures, that'd be helpful.
I mean, in terms of the modelling that we've done, we've looked at the cost of the current scheme and applied the kind of varying percentage. I mean, we know the number of people that are going to be affected is based and modelled on our current council tax data. The percentage split across NBC and the other preceptors is kind of in line with the kind of proportions of the council tax precept.
I'm seeing... Right.
Okay.
Mr. Green, do you want to come in as well? Or because I am seeing incomprehension on faces at the moment.
I understand, Councillor Borton, that what you're saying is how is the calculation of £1.14 done? How do we get to that figure? Does that make sense, Steve?
In terms of the calculation of £1.14 as an average impact, yeah, I mean, I can provide the kind of specifics. I mean, what we've done is taken the total number of claimants that received the benefit, looked at an average award across our existing customer base, which is £16.23. We've then reapplied the same calculation with the 20% reduction in support, which gives an average entitlement of £15.09, given a weekly difference of £1.14.
Councillor Borton, has that helped? All right. Councillor Garland, was it on that specific point?
Just on the figures, I think what's throwing people out is on the figures. I just want to make that point. So it just says £1.14 times by 52 is £59.28 average impact. Times that by 5,500, which is the number of people that are likely to be impacted, that comes to 326,000 savings, which is a lot less than the £360,000 that is being advocated. Now, I'd probably get that if it's just an average, but the figures are way out right across the piece on this in terms of the average impact, if it's weekly, which is why I asked the question, because I couldn't make the figures work last night. So it didn't make sense. But if it's an average across the piece, I kind of get it, but it's not accurate.
It is an average, and in terms of the numbers, like the number of customers affected at 5,500, you know, all the figures have been rounded, you know, through the calculation. So I haven't got my calculator to replicate what you just did in terms of calculation, but I'm quite happy to double check the figures and make sure that that they're confirmed within the report that goes on to full council.
Councillor Garland, you're probably going to say what I'm going to say, but please.
Well, I don't know, but we shall see. I think the average is is way out right across the piece in all of these. But I think, given that it's a weekly impact, let's just take it as what it is, £1.14 or £3.49 or £10.90, whatever it may be. Given that these are weekly figures, and I thought perhaps they may be monthly or annually, but given that these are weekly figures over a 12-month period, I know council tax payable over 10 months, but this is what we're being told, those figures are quite high. And I think that right across the piece, when I don't want to make any rhetoric, I really don't, but my bottom line is that I think these figures are onerous. I think finding £157,000, yes, of course we need to find out within the context of £4.5 million, but I think the impact that is being proposed here, particularly given it's been confirmed as weekly, I think is too much. I've had a number of thoughts about this, and I don't want to go around the houses trying to unpick this option, that option, all the rest of it. But I was thinking, if you want to lessen the impact on this across the broadest number of people, it may be an argument, and I'm certainly not proposing it at this stage, but it may be an argument to reject option 1, which would cost the average taxpayer in receipt of CTR £52.90 a year, which is, quite a significant sum for those on low incomes, which is what this is primarily aimed at, and then accept option 2 through to 13 in order to raise a good 2/3 of the 157,000 that officers and ultimately we as councillors need to find. I just think the overall proposal here is too onerous across the piece for certainly for me as an individual to accept in its entirety.
So if we can hold that thought for a moment, I still have Councillor Ring, Blackmore and Bryce who have indicated. If we hear your views, and then perhaps we can come back to that. Councillor Ring.
Thank you. We'll sit here talking about figures, and that's absolutely fine. I know what we've got to save, but wherever we go in this world at this particular moment, there are people far worse off than ourselves. I do not have enough explanation of what this criteria would be if they're suffering hardship. I don't know who's going to do that sort of interview, etc., etc. So I'd be really interested in that. But I look at some of these and I just think, you can't keep kicking people that are trying. So, and to be honest with you, if they were to get at this document to say, oh, what was the example that come, do you really think they would understand this? Because some of that, the 1 to 13, doesn't match what's in here. And haven't we got a right to answer these people properly? We've asked them to take consultation. But, sorry, Steve, I think all this is just a complete joke. If you're going to do something with people and tell them to go in the right way, it takes one bit of paper. Not all this sort of thing. So, no, I'm happy with quite a few of these because I'm going to say it, and I know you might not like it. You're robbing the poor who are already in circumstances that have problems. So, sorry, Madam Chairman, I just had to say that because I think we've got to bring it down to earth.
You don't have to apologise for your opinion. It's as valid as everybody else's. I have Councillor Blackmore next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In principle, I understand we have to make massive savings, of course. I think everybody accepts that. But if I can just draw everyone's attention to option 6 and option 9. One of those is for round figures, £15 average income, average impact. The other is £10 in round figures, average impact. Like Councillor Borton, my maths isn't great. We'll call it 25 quid. Over 52 weeks, that's £1,300. I'm sorry, if someone said to me, you've suddenly got to find £1,300, I don't know what I'd do. Now, it might only be 41 families that affects. One category we reckon affects 50, the other is 41. But that's 41 families who are sitting there saying, where do we get 1,300 quid per year from? Now, some may be able to, I don't know, increase the hours they work, but others may not be able to. And I'm sorry, I find that unacceptable, because what the figures don't tell us is we know 5,500 people are affected by option 1, and we know 440 are affected by option 2, but how much crossover is there within these subsets? Because if one family were affected by every single category, that's £67 a week. Now, I must admit, when I looked at this last night, I thought they were monthly figures. So you think, oh, all right, it's not great, but that's bearable. But if that's weekly, actually my maths is out, isn't it? It's more like £3,500. It just doesn't give us the proper story. So although I agree it in principle, I'm really sorry, but I cannot agree these figures, because I think they're just too horrifying. And I don't think we can actually do that to our residents. So I'm sorry, I'm truly, truly sorry. But like Councillor Mrs Ring, I don't think this adds up.
I'm going to ask Mr Green to come in.
Councillor Beckmore, I wondered if I could just check your calculations on the 1,300. Were you looking at option 9 there? Yeah, so
option 6 and option 9.
Yes, what I understand, and Mr McGuinness will confirm this, is there's very few instances of these options actually overlapping. So in almost all cases, people are affected by just one of the options. So to take option 9 as an example, that you can, yes, definitely you should multiply that 975 by 52 to get the annual impact, which is about £500. But it's very unlikely that somebody will be affected by a combination of these options.
OK, that's fair enough, but please will you point me to the bit in the report where it says that? Because I'm sorry, I didn't find it.
That's right. Thank you very much. There's a couple of questions there, so if I can pick up the first questions with regards to the hardship scheme by Councillor Ring. I mean, the intention would be to come back to the committee with the full document. The point of today really is to kind of set out the principle of the options, and there are a range of options for the committee to consider. Obviously, the recommendation is that they're all accepted, but it's open to the committee to accept what recommendations they see fit. In terms of who would carry out those assessments, that would be within the Revenues and Benefits team. We already do a very kind of similar function with regards to discretionary housing payments to assist people where there's exceptional hardship with their rent. So it's a function that we already do, and it would just be adding council tax to that type of process. So we've already got the staff that do that and have experience in carrying out those kind of assessments. In terms of the option 6 and option 9, as Mr Green said, there's very little crossover. I mean, option 6, I mean, perhaps first of all, in terms of why some of these options are listed, in looking at the options, this is very much a case of how we want to prioritise the money and the spend that we do for council tax support. Option 6 is looking to reduce the capital limit. Capital limit currently is £16,000, which means that you can have £15,500 in the bank and still receive support with your council tax. In terms of prioritising the money that we spend, one of the options, option 6, is that we reduce that limit down to 6,000. Yeah. Obviously, that does have an impact, and if you've got over 6,000, it will remove you from the benefit system. But there are other customers that we're asking to make a contribution towards their council tax that have greatly reduced resources, that don't have that money in the bank, and 6,000 even would seem like quite a luxury. But I accept, nevertheless, it still has a big impact. In terms of option 9, band D council tax, 70% of our residents live in a property band D or below. There's only kind of 41 residents, and I appreciate it's a big impact for those households, but in terms of fairness, if somebody's living in a band F or a band G council tax property, they're living in a much more expensive property than most residents live, yet the council tax will be supporting the rebate that they receive on their council tax charge. So in terms of some of these changes, there is a big impact, but there's potentially also an issue of fairness and where we want to put our priorities in terms of the resources that are available to us.
I'm sorry to come back, Madam Chairman, but my point about where in the report does it say that option +1, 2, whatever doesn't exist? Where is that? Because, of course, if you look at it and you add it all up, you still say someone's got to find an extra £70 a week if they were impacted by everything. So if you can point me to where in the report it says these are weekly figures, and also if someone is affected, they will be affected by one option only. I think that would be really helpful because I can't find that, I'm afraid.
Okay. I apologise if it's not made clear that it is weekly. Without kind of quickly scanning through the report, I can't say that it is or it isn't in there. In terms of the kind of overlap across the different changes, I have done that analysis, and again, apologies that it's not in the report. The level of kind of crossover between the changes is fairly limited, but some of the changes, like the change that we just discussed around the capital limit, that's an absolute requirement. So if we set the capital limit at £6,000 and you've got £7,000 in saving, you are removed from the system. You have 100% loss in the reduction that you receive on your council tax. Similar to some of the other reductions in terms of temporary absence, if somebody goes abroad for an extended period, that's an absolute qualifying criteria, and they will be removed from the system and they will not receive support. In terms of the other changes, some are looking to the future. They're going to affect new customers from April. Those that aren't, and will be changes to the existing system, examples being the change around the treatment of self-employed income, the restriction for Band D, the inclusion of child maintenance and changes to the non-dependent deductions. There's 55 households that will be affected by those changes, and potentially they will receive 100% removal of their council tax support depending on their individual circumstances and awards.
I do want to move on, Councillor Blackmore, but if you want to come back one more time.
I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, but I think there's key pieces of information that are missing here. It doesn't say it's weekly. It doesn't say it's not cumulative. I'm sorry, this is seriously flawed.
I'm going to go to everybody else who wants to speak. Councillor Garland, I know you've indicated to come back again, but I do think I've got to let first-time speakers speak. I'm going to have a quiet word with Mr Green while some people talk. So I have Councillor Bryce next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know you and your team have been looking at this in depth, and what we've got in front of us is the kind of final round of options, the more palatable ones that bring a lot of our systems into line with other changes happening in the benefit system. Did you ever look at a cap so that no household would be made a lot poorer, potentially as a percentage reflection of their household income by any of these changes? So, I'm thinking that nobody could be penalised by, more than a certain percent in line with maybe what we would consider for council tax increase generally. Was that ever an option that was looked at?
No, it's not one of the options that was included in our consultation. When we looked at revising the scheme, there were a number of options, kind of fundamental changes to the scheme, which were considered by this committee in June, and we agreed this is the kind of 13 options to go out for consultation.
Okay, then if I could just come back with one quick question. In terms of the Hardship Fund, So do you feel that you've got sufficient funds allocated during a transition period in line with all the other councils that are looking at this scheme? And how would that be publicised to people that would be affected potentially by these cuts?
I think ultimately the kind of budget for the scheme will to some extent depend on the scheme that's considered and approved by the committee. So it'd be difficult to kind of fix a sum to that. In terms of promotion of the scheme, we would see that as being kind of promoted primarily to those customers that are showing signs of kind of difficulty, so kind of strongly linked to the kind of council tax collection process, but also through kind of other advice agencies that would typically look to support customers in those circumstances.
So basically I'd have to get into difficulty over a period of time and go through the stress of that, and then you would get in contact with me. Yeah.
I think what I'm saying is that we would look for indicators that somebody's struggling. Whilst you can do general promotion of a kind of hardship scheme, we tend to find that the best kind of interventions are those that are targeted, where somebody is flagged as potentially experiencing issues, either because they've got council tax arrears or rent arrears, or in some other way showing some form of difficulty. General publicity, whilst it kind of has its place, doesn't tend to provide the same kind of outcomes.
Right, I have Councillors Harvey, English, McLaughlin and Garland indicating that, and now Councillor Harper. But in view of, I've just asked Mr Green when this has to get to full council, and that is December. We have another meeting between now and then. We could defer this to get some of the things that have been raised tonight ironed out, if I use that word, so that it can come back. But I don't want to lock down the debate if there are points of concern that need to be fed into that. So can I ask you, Councillor Harvey, first of all, what you wish to say?
I just wanted to ask quickly, and apologies, this is a stupid question, if we run the risk by making these changes, if we're going to push more people onto the homelessness list and then increase the cost in that department, and likewise, if we make these changes, are we going to have more people not paying their council tax and they're having to go down the enforcement routes, which we discussed last time as well?
With regards to the kind of homelessness issue, I think there's a risk in any change. I think it would be difficult to perhaps kind of evidence or predict. I don't think we've seen any, as a result of the changes that we've introduced so far, we've not seen any direct impact on the kind of homelessness issue, although that is a kind of growing concern for the council generally in terms of homelessness. In terms of the kind of threshold at which kind of recoverability becomes an issue, the consultant that supported the review has done some analysis, and the view is that 20% to 25% is the upper threshold after which recoverability becomes a significant issue. Our current scheme that requires a minimum contribution of 13%, in operating that, we've not seen any significant reduction in recovery. We're collecting well over 90% of the tax that's due, and we feel confident that we could do that with the scheme that's set out.
I think we can get the officer to speak to you and go through it again. But I think the question was a really solid, valid question. So we'll take that on board and add it to everything else that's been said tonight. Let me have a look. Councillor English.
Yes, if the report's coming back, I will refrain from most of what I was going to say. I would just observe two things. The officer said at one point there was virtually no overlap, and then he went on to say there is limited overlap. Actually, the two things are significantly different. So I would like clarification as to when the report comes back as to how many people are affected, because limited could still be a few dozen people as opposed to one or two, and that does make a difference. Secondly, these figures, as has been said, do need to be pretty precise, because, you know, my maths is okay, but I can't make these get anywhere near the figures we're talking about. Finally, I do agree with Councillor Harvey's point. I do think that we've got to be careful of saving money somewhere and then adding costs elsewhere in the council. So that whilst it's difficult to bottom out, I think it is the other half of what we need to consider. And sorry, there was just one final thing. You said absolute in relation to 1 or 2 points you made. I would hope that we would not be saying that a 4-week plus absence would necessarily be absolute. What happens to some poor person who's on, for whatever reason, abroad, and they end up in a hospital for 5 weeks abroad, and then they come back, and residents of Maidstone have been in that position, and they come back, and because they've been sitting in a hospital, their council tax reduction has gone at a point at which they may just have paid out a significant medical bill. You know, we've got to make sure that things like that are picked up in any hardship paper. I know it's an unusual circumstance, but it can and does happen. So we've got to be careful about absolute rules because they can really ruin people's lives.
Mr McGuinness, do you want to answer that?
Thank you. In terms of the level of overlap, I apologise if I didn't state the figure. The current profiling suggests that there will be 55 households in total out of the 5,500 that are affected by more than one of the changes. In terms of the kind of exceptions that you discussed, as I say, you know, we would be looking to build it into the scheme to say that absence beyond a certain point, you would cease to qualify from the main scheme. But as you said, the hardship scheme is there to pick up exceptions on a kind of case-by-case basis. It is very much about looking at how we want to prioritise the funds, you know, kind of given the financial constraints that the council's under. An example that you gave is one of those areas that there's strong public support to say that that should be given a low priority.
Councillor English, are you okay?
I will explore these points further when it comes back. I have to say, I understand it's a difficult situation, but I'm glad it's being deferred because I could not support the report as it stands.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. If I may just give you a pointer, Steve, I do note in this average week, this is not a question, it's just to help you go forward, that presumably the average weekly impact is based on the total council tax, including the money going to the other preceptors, KCC, fire and rescue, etc., not just the MBC element divided by the number of council taxpayers. It may help you if you look at that clarification. The question I wanted to ask is you don't make any reference anywhere else in here, I think, to what other local authorities in Kent are doing and how what you're proposing compares with that. And I do recall when this was set up 3 years ago and we agreed at the 13% figure, other authorities were in there at 17, maybe 18, maybe 20% then. And we decided to keep it at 13. And I think in coming back with your report, I would like to see where we stand relative to other local authorities.
And Councillor Harper.
I think it would be good, obviously, that we look at this again in a couple of weeks' time. But I think we do need one thing to understand. It's a number of people, there are going to be a number of people affected, I would imagine, by more than one of these items. And if we're looking at people with disabilities and severe disabilities, the likelihood is when you look at things like options 7, 10 and 11, you could well be impacted by all 3 of those options, let alone any others. And so for people who have already been hit by potentially things like the bedroom tax, they could suddenly be losing another 500 or 600 quid's worth of support here. And we're talking about some of the most disadvantaged and disabled people in our communities. I think that's something really we need to understand. Is the impact on groups like that. And I think a general point, the difficulty obviously of saying public support behind some of these things, well, most of the public responding are probably not affected by these proposals. So they probably would just think, well, actually, I'm not affected by this, this all sounds sensible and so on. And it's the impact of the individuals we need to have cognizance about, because that's our role, I think, here, to champion them. And just, in terms of wording, I'm not happy necessarily with the word, obviously, you use and it's perhaps accepted in the finance department, of using of customers. These are residents of the borough. They're not a customer in the sense of that implies some form of choice. They live in the borough. Okay, I suppose you don't have to live in Maidstone, but if you live in a house or a flat in the borough, you're not a customer of Maidstone Council. You know, you have no choice apart from to pay council tax or whatever. So I would just honestly urge if we could use the word residents rather than that. And I just generally think, okay, there'll be a hardship fund, but for a lot of people who are disadvantaged and on very low income, discretionary funds, hardship funds, whatever you make it sound like, it feels like begging to them. They feel like they're having to beg and plead a case, and that is an awful place for anybody to be in. And so we really need to make sure that the basic scheme is robust enough from the, you know, the poorest people in our community, so that the hardship scheme isn't being used much, because we don't want people feeling they're begging and pleading to be able to live. And that's what the reality, if you like, the flip side of some of this is. The bigger the hardship fund, because we're hard on this thing, means more people, and it's the stress. I mean, we all know, I'm sure, people who've been through stuff with the welfare situation, and the mental damage it causes people's health is atrocious. So we just need to think about some of those points when we reconsider this.
I'm going to say, in fairness to Mr McGuinness, this has been it is always an excruciatingly difficult report to write. Anything that affects the residents of this borough is a very difficult report to write. I've had Councillor Garland and Councillor Borton indicate they'd like to come back, but first I'm going to say I'm going to move from the chair that this is deferred to come to the November meeting. And before I need a seconder for that. Who got their hand up first? Councillor Ring, I think. I'm sorry, Councillor Cox, you're so far to my right. It's difficult so, however, before we go to a vote, in fairness, but please make it brief, Councillor Garland and Councillor
I think
Borton.
it's important for officers to understand what we're deferring it for. A straightforward deferral is for what for? I think the report, generally speaking, is very good. It's a very difficult report to write. I understand all that. I do want to come back after this, by the way. But I do think it's important that officers understand why it's being deferred. Just simply putting PW next to the average impact is, well, we know it's per week now, that's irrelevant. It's the fundamental substance. What are we deferring it for?
I think it would be very difficult to actually get into a deferral every point that has been made tonight. I'm going to ask Mr Green if he feels he has actually had an opportunity to capture everything and maybe to feed back to us what has been recorded that needs to be looked at, because I know you have been writing copiously. So.
Yes, I'm happy that with my notes and Mrs Matthews' notes of the webcast, we can capture the various points made and, working with Mr McGuinness, come back with an updated report next time.
So, Councillor Garland, if we say to defer as per the points made in the minutes, which we can actually get, and we'll try and get out to people, or at least on this item.
I think it'd be very useful for Mr Green to actually itemise the points he thinks he's gained from this particular meeting. Because it's all very well saying some points at the committee, but we don't know what they are. They're things that you've written down, hopefully. It'd be useful for us to actually understand what your thinking is from what you're taking away from the meeting.
I will ask Mr Green to say what he has taken, and then I will ask Mrs Matthews. We only expect the notes, Mrs Matthews, not an English essay. So to see if we've got encapsulated what everybody's been saying tonight. Yes, Mr Green.
Without repeating all the points, I think they come under a number of different headings. I think the first set of points that have been made have been about the clarity of the report. So making clear that it's a weekly figure, satisfying members about the calculation. So it's about how the information is presented. So that's the first point that I've taken here. The second point is there's obviously an important one about the cumulative impact of the changes that we're proposing, and I know that Mr. McGuinness has done some work on that, so we can present that in an updated report. And the final point is about the impact of the individual changes, and as a number of people have said, it is recognised that these are very difficult for the individuals concerned, and yes, there's a hardship fund, but for most people it's a last resort to go to that. So we'll consider the practical impact of these changes on residents and consider whether there's any changes that we would want to make to the proposals in the light of the comments that members have made. If that's helpful.
Can I add Councillor Harvey's point to this, that it's not just the impact on the individual residents, it's also the knock-on effect, if I could put it that way, to other costs that the council may have, so that we can see, so that we can clearly see not just that we need to save money elsewhere and this is towards it, but that if we do this, it may have an impact that raises a cost somewhere else if the impact was such that homelessness, for example, increased. Now, I know that's a very difficult thing to do, but I think it's a valid point that was made, so we need, I think, that added as well. Mrs. Matthews, do you think what Mr. Green has said has covered more or less what you have, or is there anything in addition?
Just some of the comments that were made were that the figures weren't accurate, the figures are onerous, and the impact is too much. And it's not clear where that some people might be affected by more than one of the options.
Councillor McLaughlin.
I did ask for a comparison with other local authorities.
As I say, I think this is going to be very difficult to actually add to an actual deferral. But if we can say that we have got the webcast, so we can actually refer completely back to it to ensure that whatever we've discussed is covered. If on that ground you are happy to agree that we defer for a November report to come back, then I'm happy to move that. Councillor Ring has seconded it. So can I have a show of hands for those in favour of deferral? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. That's been another difficult session, but thank you, Mr. McGuinness. So we now move on to item 14, which is on page 90, and I believe, Councillor Harper, you are going to have to remove yourself for this item. You'll find it on page 91, I think, of your report. God, where is it? And Ms. Stroud is going to introduce this, if you would, please.
Thank you. The council owns a large area of open space of Unicum's Lane in the Fant Ward, known as Fant Wildlife Site. There's a local volunteer community group, known as the Fant Wildlife Group, who now wish to formally take responsibility for the management and maintenance of the site. In order to facilitate this, the site has been declared surplus to operational requirements by the Heritage, Leisure and Culture Committee. The land has been publicly advertised for disposal, and it is now recommended that the committee agrees to dispose of the land to the Fant Wildlife Group on a long-term leasehold basis.
Councillor Borton.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think this is a jolly good idea. Let's not prolong the debate. The Fant Wildlife Group and Councillor Harper and his friends do very good work in the local area. We've got, being a leasehold basis, we've got the necessary provisions if it doesn't work out for the council. So I'd like to move the recommendations as on the papers in front of us, and thank you very much for
Councillor English has indicated to speak. Hopefully may second this, but we'll see.
Yes, I used to live very near this. This is a very good proposal. I mean, I've only got a question. I mean, obviously there are good reasons why it wasn't decided to dispose of the freehold, but it would probably be worth putting those on the record as to why it's a leasehold disposal for 99 years, just so that, because it doesn't entirely come through the report, so I would just think it might be useful. But I do agree with Councillor Borton that the recommendation on the paper should be supported. This is a group that has done tremendous amount of good work and is continuing to do a tremendous amount of good work in an area that used to be ecologically challenged, but is much, much better now.
I don't want to extend this too much, but Councillor McLaughlin wished to say something.
I don't want to pour oil on any of that good discussion. I just want to know from a legal point of view what the fallback situation is in the event of default. Was it termination of lease?
Yes, it would be. Yes, if the group, it outlines in the report, have to provide regular reports to us, have to provide proof that they're managing the site in a way that we would wish them to, and if they didn't, then yes, we would be able to terminate their lease.
Sorry, Councillor English.
I did ask Ms Stroud if she could just briefly say why we felt it better to have a leasehold, just so that...
The group, the wildlife group, didn't actually request freehold transfer of the site. They were happy with a long leasehold. That gives them access to the funding they require. It gives them the management and the maintenance options that they need. So a freehold wasn't discussed.
Thank you very much.
I therefore, the recommendation is on page 91 to agree to dispose of the open space land outlined in red on the attached plan. Those in favour? Councillor Ring, are you voting? And it was seconded by, sorry, it was moved by Councillor Borton, it was seconded by Councillor English. That's unanimous. Thank you. We move to item 15, which is on page... Sorry? Oh, yes, we'll wait for Councillor Harper to come back. Right, members, we move on to item 15, which you'll find on page 98 of your papers. Before we actually ask Mrs Woodhouse to introduce this, can I just refer you to page 115? I've picked up on something there. I know Councillor Bryce has as well, and I believe other members have, that we've still got it written as though we have a cabinet system. And so if tonight we agree the recommendations, it will be with the addition of that being corrected to it's a it's a full council decision, not as is written on the papers. Has everybody? Yes, Councillor Ring. Well, let's get Mrs Woodhouse to introduce it first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As councillors will be aware, we have in place a new communications team with the final member of the team joining us on Monday. This strategy sets out how we will communicate and engage with our key audiences and the roles we all play. Council communication does not rely or fall to the comm teams alone, as we all know. And as we discussed at the two councillor workshops earlier this year, we identified that everyone has a role to play in our communications. Councillors often act as our advocates for the council and also represent the public voice, so you feed back to us what your residents are saying, and that is a really key role. Our employees need to be engaged in our priorities so they have a clear purpose, focus and sense of pride in their work. With this in mind, a new section has been included in the action plan on pride in our borough. Yes, some errors have been brought to my attention since publication, as Councillor Mrs Wilson has mentioned. So on page 115, page 11 of the strategy, the second paragraph should end after council. So that should be a full stop. And as agreed by corporate leadership team, and leader of the council should be removed. And I've got a couple of others, just, before anyone else gets there. On page 111, the word will should be deleted from the councillor's role. I'm really sorry, that sounds directional. It was not intended to be directional at all. And I read it back and I was like, oh, I'm going to get shot for that. So apologies, it's not a directive. It's meant to be saying the role you do, and it's not meant to be you must. So I'm very sorry about that. That should be removed, the word will. And the final thing, and this is a bit a typo, but on page 4 of the strategy, page 108, the title of that page should be Vision, Mission and Values. And that is a typo. We seem to have overdone it with the S's, and we're not having many visions and missions. There is just one of each. So I'm sorry for that, but I thought I'd point that out now. The other thing I'd like to draw your attention to, aside from those minor points, is there is a member sounding board included in the action plan. The first meeting of that should be December 2016, not 2017. I've included the member sounding board so we can develop good two-way communication with you on what's happening in the council, following feedback that some of you do not always feel as engaged as you want to be. So we're looking to improve this going forward. So the idea of the sounding board is to give you a chance to talk to us about how you're being communicated to, what's going on in the council, and so we can tell you what we're doing and have that two-way conversation in a slightly more informal setting, but hopefully where you can help us to help you. So things like, if you're not getting the information you need, how can we get that to you? And one of the first things that, I don't know if I should bring this up, one of the first things I'd like that group to do, if that's okay, is to look at our intranet. So as you see in the action plan, I thought I'd bring it up first. In our intranet, we have got a plan in there. Our digital team have a plan in place to look at the intranet. We're going to be using the same platform as we use for our internet. And the comms team will be taking responsibility for the intranet. I would like to emphasise we do not have responsibility for it at the moment. So each of those pages are owned by different teams, which is why some of that data is out of date and not as good as it could be. So we're looking at moving it to a new site, starting again, and I'm looking at having a lot less information on, but what I'd like to know from councillors is what are the things you look at all the time, what are the things that would be valuable, and I know from speaking to some of you, some of that information is actually stuff that we already have on our website, our external site, for example, the Constitution. So I wouldn't want to store that document in 4 or 5 different places where it potentially could be out of date in one and up to date in another. I would look to have a link that takes you to the external site for the Constitution, because that's where it's most up to date. So we'll be looking at that kind of thing with that group, that's the kind of thing. And also, you know, what kind of information do you want from us that you're not getting, and in what way should we be giving it to you? But that's sort of just a bit more of an insight into why that's been thrown in there. I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Councillor Ring, you indicated. You're on.
Thank you. You picked up on a lot of points that I picked up on it, and I'll be very, very honest. I got through 5 pages and I thought, I ain't going to be told how to act. I'm a councillor. The only people that tell me how to act is the residents. So I could go through a lot here tonight. Again, a very big glossy. I keep being told we've got to do cutback, and all I keep seeing is these documents, like the other one, that are really telling the public nothing. You could really cut this all down. And I know technology is the way forward. Well, I'm sorry, there's lots of people like me out there and residents who just like to read the facts. But yes, it's been quite... There's somewhere there where we've called residents, you know, simple. Why have we put out all these residents in a category? If you're a resident, you're a resident. Doesn't matter if you're disabled. It doesn't matter what colour they are. We're a resident. We're asking the resident of the borough. So all I'm saying is this is a lot of money, telling a lot of information which you've already picked on that isn't right. I think it needs correcting, and I think every councillor on this council should contribute with anything they found in this document, because I don't think it talks for us. May talk for officers, but we're the ones who look after the council. It's also got here, down with the leadership team and the leader. No disrespect to whoever that leader is, but I thought we started committees.
Councillor Ring, we've already said that that needs correction.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. No, but it's no disrespect, but we're in committees. So every committee member should have something to do with it. Not just a title, but to actually do with it, how would you look at these things from your own committee? So no disrespect, because I know you work very hard, Angela, but the communication team do not know us, and we don't know them very well. Not at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Gooch, I wasn't sure whether you did, I think you did. You did. So you are next.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask, I'm sorry, you did rattle through the typos, and I beg your pardon, but on page, I can't read it, but it's blue page 4, under the vision, mission and value. Under the responsibility, we work in an environment that encourages to take ownership. This is on the right-hand side for our actions. Not sure if you picked that up. Is that all right? On the next page, which is blue page 5, for clarity, really, the second paragraph, you've put the council does face significant budget challenges. Fine. The communication team must adapt and rise to the challenge of... And I thought, hang on a minute, why the community... Have I missed something? I thought it would be we must adapt and rise. We meaning officers, councillors, da-da-da. Is that... But was there a reason? I don't want to just criticise for the sake of it. Did you have something in mind? You look as if you did.
When this was drafted, the perspective is the communications team are putting across the point that there's only so much we can do. So as a council, while budgets are being cut, we don't have the resources to do some of the things we might have done in the past in terms of how we talk to residents, the different things we do, and that's why that's in there. But I think you're right, it would look better to broaden that and make it a wider responsibility. So I would agree, if it's up to the committee, dropping the communications team and changing it for we probably makes more sense in the context of the whole strategy.
Thank you. And I just have one more point, please. On blue page 16, objective, people from different backgrounds get on well together. And what we plan to do, which is in the first box, you mention the Mellor as an example. I feel a bit nervous about that. And the reason is, I'll say we, are just beginning to look at the best way of celebrating all these different backgrounds and all our differences. What is the best way of doing it? Because Mellor has got a specific meaning that doesn't actually reflect all the different communities we have. So not only is the way that we produce the Mellor may be changing, we're still consulting on that, but the actual name of what we're calling it. So I'm just feeling a bit nervous about that. Is there any way that we could perhaps, or am I just being oversensitive here? I don't want to put the cart before the horse.
Again, it says such as, so it's there as an example of one of the things we do. But yeah, I can take that out if members wish it to be removed.
Could I, with your permission, Councillor Gooch, I suggest that because of the discussions that are currently going on at the moment about or beginning to take place, about the best way to celebrate diversity in this borough, it might be diplomatic at this point in time to actually remove that. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. That's it. Thank you.
Before I move on, I'd like to bring in Mr. Green, because I must say, from my own viewpoint, I don't think this is just about the comms team. This is actually talking about the responsibility of everybody, and not in a dictatorial way, but the responsibility of everybody in relation to the communications that this borough puts out, and the responsibilities of different branches, whether it's officer or councillor, about the need to present the truth and honesty, but at the same time to try and explain the work that everybody does and the reason for it. It is not easy, and it can't just be left to a comms team. It is broader than that. So, Mr. Green, if you would come in, and then I have at least another 3 people wishing to speak.
Yes, thank you.
you're having trouble as well. Oh,
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's possible to get a bit hung up about the detail of the document and the typos and so on, and obviously we need to tidy it up. But I think the important thing here is that we set a process in motion. There's quite a lot in the action plan here and quite a lot of things that we need to do to realise this vision of pride in the borough. And what we've said here, we really mean that it's a collective process. We want to involve members with it so that we're all saying the same things. We're consistent in the messages that we present as a borough. We make people feel positive about it. So it is more than just the communications team, as Councillor Mrs Wilson has said. So it's a starting point rather than the end product. That's what I would say.
Thank you. I have Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Chair. Madam Chairman. I really want to first start by applauding the fact that we have got the vision to produce a document like this. Because without something like this, we can't all look to see what we should be doing. Whether we are grey, pink, blue, black or whatever, we have to know, we have to have a guide. And we have to formulate that guide and move forward from that. And not worry about whether something's absolutely been missed out, because we aren't all technically as brilliant as some of the people we are now employing. We couldn't look after everything that is out there because the amount of social media that is hitting this council and that we have to look at, whether you're on it or whether anybody else is on it or not, it's out there and we must listen to all avenues of media. How we're perceived by our residents is very important. It could be down to how we hear our website, not whether we look at our website, because we need to look at every single avenue around our borough. Having an intranet system, and I thought Angela was going to look over my way when she mentioned it, because she usually does, has been something I've been harping on about for 3 years, because that's how long it's been out of date. And whether we're in control of it, I believe it should be removed, taken down now. It has incorrect information on it. And the new members that come to our council, I don't think they have a sense of belonging to something because they can't see the actual structure. If you look at it now, it's 5 years out of date, some of it. So it isn't a useful tool. But most of the stuff that we're looking at here is showing us the way. It may not be absolutely perfect at the moment, but at least it's a very good step forward, and I salute the department for doing this, because I know everybody needs to fall roughly into line with how we are perceived. But the work that's been done so far looks professional. Whether there is a minutiae of the dots and whether we've got everything there, that is what the group that hopefully will be pulled together will look at and will make better sense of. But at the moment, well done, we're on the road.
Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had an initial question and then I'll get into the feedback that I have on this report. Who prepared this document? Was it done with any input from an external agency or was it just done internally?
The document was prepared with the communications team. It followed 2 workshops with councillors on the resident survey and the outcomes of the resident survey, so that fed into it, which everyone was invited to, and we had actually had quite a good response to that. And then the plan itself went through our leadership team, and now it's come to you for your input and inclusion. We haven't gone to an external agency because that would require funding resources, and I believe we've got most of the expertise in-house, so we didn't go externally to do it.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I really struggle with this. I'm afraid I have been involved in marketing and sales and PR and communications for a long time, and I struggle in the face of the discussion that we've had tonight about asking residents to pay potentially hundreds, if not thousands of pounds, that we are focusing potentially a lot of resources against these items. I understand the need to have, you know, a wider strategy, but some of the detail here really concerns me. I'm also struggling a little bit with the action plan, which seems to have a lot of objectives in it, and not enough for me, but I appreciate, you know, this may be at odds to other members. It doesn't have enough for me of what action we're going to take, what the potential cost could be, and how we will quantify the effectiveness of these. For example, a review of current council branding on all materials and considering options to strengthen and future-proof. Well, a review of branding could be massive. You know, what if people say, well, we want to be green, we don't want to be orange? You know, I know that's probably not where you were going to go, but somebody could read this and misinterpret it. So for me, I think we need to look at more specifics in here. In terms of some of the external communications as well, I'm actually quite concerned that, you know, our engagement figures are so low on some of these elements, and you may argue that's exactly why we need this kind of policy. But actually, I think we've been doing a lot of this for some time now, and if only 56% of residents feel fairly or very informed about the services, then, you know, and you're doing, you know, may I say, a reasonable job, and I've been impressed coming to the council by the work being done. But does it really matter in the context of service delivery and making very difficult decisions? You know, should our priorities be elsewhere, and can any of this really be scaled back and pared back? Because I'm not really convinced, in the context of the very difficult decisions that we're asking of residents, this is where we should be focusing our potential revenues.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments. I would say that this isn't, there have been no additional resources committed, so a lot of these actions will be undertaken by the communications team themselves, so we're not employing extra resources to do this. Some of our biggest campaign work are things like we've just done one on the dog bins, and we've done one on green waste. We've got another one coming up on food waste. That team have a budget that they get a grant from externally to publicise recycling and all of those things, and that's the budget we'd be using for those campaigns. So it's not additional resources. This strategy sets out where we're going to focus our action, what we're going to focus on, and most of this is day-to-day work. It's things we're picking up and things we deal with all the time. For example, like the social media side of things. Our comms team, we have an officer whose job it is to go onto Street Life, to go onto Facebook, and we do address comments pretty quickly with a good response, and it's dealing with quite a lot of negativity a lot of the time, and we're there to promote the council's reputation and deal with service issues. And also people tend to use our social media channels almost as a bit of a complaints hotline. So we're picking that up to respond to residents and go, okay, you've raised this issue, we pass it on to this service. And I think if we pared back that team or that resource anymore, I'd question what you want to achieve as a council. There's a key role for that team, and it is already significantly, it's not a big team. You're looking, we've got 3 people plus the design function, and it's in-house, so it's cheaper. If we went, for example, if we went externally, it would cost a lot more. They help support other teams within the council. They've got a big role in terms of, particularly, like, for example, Jen Shepherd's team, as I mentioned, so Councillor Ring will be aware of that from the work that goes through and the different campaigns we're running. I think they contribute a lot, and we deliver a lot within that small resource. But I'd be prepared to go through in more detail, and I'm certainly quite happy to bring that information to the member sounding board as well, so you can have an opportunity to see what we're doing and to talk to you about how we're dealing with things, because we also deal a lot of the time with press inquiries, for example. That takes up a huge amount of time for that team, because we get a lot of inquiries and we can't just ignore them, and we're looking at managing the reputation of the council and getting the right information out there. So when the local press may be running a story that actually isn't factually accurate, hasn't got all the information we'd want our residents to see about our services, that's my team who step in and talk to the head of service, talk to the committee chairman, and bring that information forward to the press to get the right information out there.
Councillor English.
I think it's a very good report in many ways, but I would say, in answer to some comments elsewhere, we don't actually probably need to spend much on external consultants to realise that some of the fundamental basics of communications, some of which are not actually covered in the strategy, perhaps because they seem so obvious that they weren't worth mentioning. But a lot of people can't contact me as a councillor because they can't actually get through to the council. We have a phone system that doesn't work, frankly. It is creaky. Martin's covered the intranet issue. We have a situation where you don't know whether an email is going to come to you or not because our firewall is so unpredictable that anything with an attachment is quite likely never to reach you, and you will never know, in most cases, whether or not that was sent. Sometimes you will get a message saying your email has been quarantined. So there are these fundamental basics that need to be addressed in any communication strategy before we do anything else. We also have to be aware that one of the reasons that the figure for understanding it and communicating with the council might be so low is because some of the main channels of communication we use no longer go to significant parts of the borough, despite the claims of certain media groups to do so. We know it's not true. And we do need to re-examine our strategy for media and communications if one of our main channels of communication is only going to something like 55% of the households in the borough. So these fundamental things are not things that need a lot of rocket science, although sometimes I do think giving every councillor a carrier pigeon might be the simplest communication strategy. What I would say is going forward, we do know what, within certain bounds, what we need to do. This report is quite good. Some of the things have been picked up on, I think, were because of the English language, the example of the word will in councillors. I don't think that was an instruction. That was simply an observation that during the course of one's working life, if you can call it that, that's what will inevitably happen. But we have a strategy, we will have a sounding board, and I do beg members with issues and views and concerns to get involved in that process. One final observation. What's needed are clear channels of communication, and I usually agree with Councillor Ring, but I do think you have to realise that if you're blind, and I think Martin sort of mentioned this, you hear a website. You don't look at a website, you hear it. And we have to be careful because quite often we have files on our website which cannot be read by the software that blind people use because of the way that the graphics are compiled. Simple things that we can do to actually ensure that disabled people can access our communications. And that's not difficult. It's just a case of sitting down and thinking and communicating with people who have expertise in these fields. And finally, yes, I think the term simple was mentioned somewhere. Yes, well, that's an unfortunate term in many ways, but we have to bear in mind that disabilities come in all shapes and forms. They're not always physical. When we had the scrutiny review on this issue, many of which recommendations are actually very relevant to this report, we did examine in great detail how the council could be socially inclusive. And any communication strategy that isn't is not only not going to be a communication strategy, it is probably flawed in law, and that's likely to continue to be the case whether we're in the EU or not. So the fact of the matter is we do have to take on board those things, but we should be doing it because we want to and because we want to be the best, not because it's a legal requirement.
Mrs Woodhouse, did you wish to comment or just... I think you agree. I have another 4 people wishing to speak, and Councillor Ring, you wanted to come back. Councillor Borton is next.
Thank you very much. And I read this with interest yesterday on the train up to London. And the one question kept coming through my mind as I was doing this, and that was if I was knocking on a door to someone in Fant Ward and I said, right, this is what your council tax is being spent on, how could I justify that? And by the way, we've got council tax reduction and we want to make £157,000 worth of cuts. And I found that a very difficult sell, in all honesty, irrespective of the no lack of additional resources or so on and so forth. So I then had a little read through it again on the way home, and I thought, right, what can we do to improve this and make it better? And I found myself being a bit radical, in all honesty, and thinking that a potential solution would be to separate internal communications from external communications, because you're appealing to two totally different audiences. Internal communications is about motivated staff, it's about keeping them willing to go the extra mile for the council, and it's about making sure ultimately that they do their jobs properly and are rewarded when they do so, and know that there is an expectation for them as public sector workers to deliver for the people of the borough. And then there's the external communications, where we as councillors help with that but are not part of it, which is all about making sure that we do all of us around this table do our jobs, and that's to me are the two most important things. So I find it very hard to take and to approve of a document in which both things are addressed. Some things apply to both, some things are just external, as on the page I'm on here, some things are just internal. So I find that very, very difficult. I could go through it and pick holes in certain things, and that to an extent has been done already, but I see that as pretty worthless, in all honesty. Having read this twice now, I'm minded to think that we need to think again, in all honesty, about this. That's not me saying that we shouldn't communicate or anything like that, but it's a strategy, and I think it needs to be clear and simple. And as one of my old bosses used to say, a strategy you should be able to summarise in a sentence, and I couldn't do that with this as well. And just one point I would make, one detailed point I would make on this before handing the floor over to others, and that's what I've just had a look at then about new media and new ways of communicating with people. And I looked on the Twitter feed, and Maidstone Council has 10,600 followers, and its Facebook page, as of 10 minutes ago, has 2,329 likes. Well, of course, that is in no way representative of the majority of the borough, and I'm sure half of those probably don't even live in the borough if they're people at all on Twitter or folk like us. So I think we've got to, we can talk all we want about new media, social media, whatever it's called, but we've got to think about good old-fashioned sort of communicating with residents the old-fashioned way, and because that's still the most effective way of doing it. And the newspaper circulation is going down as well, as Councillor English said, and I agreed with him on that point. But I do think we need to have a bit of a radical rethink of this, and actually, in all honesty, simplify it a bit.
I think I'll just go on to the next person and we'll try and get all of this together. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if the members' sounding boards, like the sound of that, like to be on it, could be held sort of later in the day so those of us at work could get there. Yeah.
Councillor Firmer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think we probably need to wrap this all up. I think you've had a bit of a battering. I think in comms, you get a lot of crap thrown at you, and it's not an easy job. I think there's been merits in a lot of what's been said here, but then there's also a point where you have to set out your overarching mission, and I think the working group will form a part of that, and then step by step work out all the tiny details, which are very important, like the intranet, but that can only be done once we've got this kind of initial first step done, sorted, and gone, and then we can work our way down. And I'm not saying that this first step is complete yet, and I think a lot of what people have concerns about is that first step. Yeah, I think it's a tough decision, and thank you for what you've produced. I will, though, say that, as famously was said, I think a few years ago by a politician, Britain is not Twitter. Yes, I think we all understand that. And the same, Britain is also not Facebook, and the same way Maidstone is not Twitter or Facebook. However, if you don't have a presence there, you will fail because you're getting residents complaining on there, and if you don't respond to those, we will suffer as a borough. And so by no means should it be our only avenue for communication, but it should be something we have resource assigned to and consider. But that's just my two. I do work in digital comms sometimes, so that's probably why I'm a bit biased.
Councillor Ring, if you wish to come back, and then I have Councillor Blackmore.
Just quickly, I don't think I said anywhere where people with a disability shouldn't be told. What I said, and let's make it clear, that not everybody goes on digital. I'm very with Councillor Borton. If this is a communication for the public, it shouldn't be mentioned about the staff. Sorry, it's a completely different thing. But the second thing is, I'm on about labels. If this is for the residents of the borough, it's for everybody. You don't need to be labelled if you have a different religion, if you have a different disability. What you need to is be able to understand it, whatever way it comes across, whether that's digital or picking this up. They don't want to know what the staff have got to do. And that's one of the big things that I picked up on it. Are you telling the public or are you telling internal staff? It shouldn't be in the same document. Or if it is, really put out, this is what we expect our staff to do. So that's all I'm saying.
Thank you for those comments. What I would say is if you look at most council strategies, they include both the internal and external. That is in one document. I think it does clearly set out which actions apply to our employees, which actions we're looking at for residents, which ones for councillors, and some of those will have crossovers. So it's not unusual. It is also not that far away from our previous strategy. So the previous strategy, which has been which was in place, had actions for employee engagement, actions. It covered internal and external. And in terms of resource, in putting this together, it's a resource of my team. It's not hundreds of thousands of pounds. It's not some whizzy document that we got someone to do. We spent design time on it, which is so many hours of a designer's time, an in-house designer of a grade, I think, 7 or 8 posts. It's not a huge amount of resource that's got into producing this. They have tried to make it look professional because I think it's really important that we have a document that looks professional. And I appreciate there's some typos and I will pick it up. The other thing I would say is that we did speak to councillors in bringing this forward, has come forward as a result of those 2 workshops we held with you all where we looked at the resident survey, and the comms team were at those workshops and they spoke to you all. In fact, it was their first day for the new members, and sadly we lost one of those new members of the team quite early on, so we have had issues with resources in that team. The other point I would make is the Budget Roadshow, for example. We worked really hard to put that together, and that was at the request of councillors. You wanted a public-facing roadshow to talk to our residents, and the comms team have been at every single one of those events. Councillors haven't, and you haven't all engaged, but they have been there, and their door is open. You can come in any time and see us on floor 4. I'm more than happy for any of you to pick up the phone and speak to me, and some of you have. Like, I have regular conversations with, I know with you, with Councillor Cox as well on the internet, one of our favourite topics. So I have regular dialogue with all of you, and I really hope you would raise with me if there are things you're concerned about that the team are not delivering and things that aren't happening that you think should be happening across the council. So I would encourage you all to talk to me more, and please, if this does go through, take part in the member sounding board and have your say and have an impact. We want to hear what you've got to say.
I will say that the intranet is one of my favourite topics too. Well, it's very out of date, and yet it should be one of the most basic tools that councillors can use and officers use. However, Councillor Blackmore, then I have Councillor McLaughlin.
I'd like to start with something positive. I do think that the communications team do a good job. I think it's a tough situation to be in because often you have to react quickly to something that happens and you can't necessarily plan what that something will be. It might be an article in the paper, as you say, it's something on social media. So I think from that perspective, I think the comms team really do an excellent job. But actually, that's not what we're talking about. The problem I have with this document is this, to me, says operations. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we do it. This doesn't say strategy. It really doesn't. It says what we're going to do, how we're going to carry it out. A strategy you can write in 2 paragraphs. Yeah. That's your top document. Other things fall off that. I'd like to make a request for the previous communication strategy, just so I can do a quick comparison between the two. The thing I'm suffering with or struggling with this is, to me, this is a justification process. When we had the budget prioritisation meeting back in August, one of the things that came up then was about communication and the fact that we had different people doing communications in different places. And this, I can't work out whether this is gathering all the strands together or it's a justification for having X number of people in a team. I just can't quite work that out. And I'm sorry, that's what I'm struggling with. But finally, I'd just like to know who's the target audience for this. Is this for staff and councillors? Is it to residents? Is it to external agencies? Is it to other bodies? And again, I can't work that out because would they really be interested in the action plan? And I'm assuming the action plan will be is a dynamic document. It's reviewed every year. Again, it's almost justifying the existence.
Mr. Green, I think. Oh, sorry, Mr. Green, I think you should come in, please.
Yes, I'll pick up on the very specific point about having a consistent and coordinated marketing and communications operation, and steps are in place to make sure that we do have that. We're moving towards having a single central resource for marketing and communications in the council.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Blackmore?
I didn't actually ask that at all. I did refer to the fact that at the budget prioritisation meeting there was talk about why are different people doing communications around different parts of the organisation, so I'm glad that that has actually been streamlined. However, I'd still like to know who the target audience is for this particular document and why a strategy document runs to 20 pages. Maybe if we cut out some of the graphics, we could kind of concertina it a bit. But it's just too wordy. I'm sorry, it's just too wordy.
Well, we can come back to that later, but I'm going to bring in Councillor McLaughlin in.
Speak to you. There we go. I really don't know why everybody's having so much trouble with this. It is clearly an internal document, and as such, it has to cover internal communications and how we communicate externally. I'm with Councillor Cox on this. We've got to have a framework that we all agree to, that our officers can work to. And I think, as far as this goes, it's a very good start. The action plan at the end is clearly for us to monitor how they're performing. It's not justification, it's tasking themselves with how we're going to go forward. And frankly, I think it's a very good start. We do have to look much better at our customer communications. I read out the paragraph on page 3 of the document. The effectiveness of how we deliver our vision is determined to a significant extent by the quality of our communications and engagement. I would slightly reword that to say the effectiveness of how our vision is perceived by our people we're communicating with is determined by a significant extent by the quality of our communications. That's the only comment I would make on this. It's obviously going to lead to our outwardly focused communications as well as our internal communication. So I think a lot of good work is in this, and I wouldn't want the comms team to go away dispirited by what they've heard tonight.
Mrs Woodhouse, can I ask if you will take that wording? Or I'm happy to second that, by the way. Oh, sorry. I'm happy to second that because I do think that word is better. I know we've got a lot to agree, but does the committee as a whole agree that change? So, Mrs Matthews, have you got that then? To change, we'll actually, it's the change of word to perception. We'll make sure it's correct here in the, it's perceived, yes. So, I do have Councillor Harper, and then I'm going to wrap it up, and I have something to say.
I was going to move the recommendations on the report on page 98. I think we've had a long discussion on this. I think this is quite an important document because without a strategy in terms of communications, we haven't got a clue what we do as an authority. We've got limited resources. This helps actually the communications team and our senior officers focus and prioritise on the most critical types of communications we need as an authority, then it's a document worth producing. And I think it probably does do that. So I'm happy to move the recommendations in the report.
Yes, I did get that, Councillor Cox. So moved by Councillor Harper, seconded by Councillor Cox.
It will require some slight amendment because it will obviously have to say something along the lines taking on under point 1 with the comments and notes made or something to that effect. Otherwise, we wouldn't be picking them up.
I think I said at the beginning, actually, of the evening that if we were minded to agree the recommendations, it would be with the additions of the amendments that were proposed.
Yes, but technically, that wasn't what Councillor Harper moved, so...
There is one question that I want to ask the committee very clearly, and that is within the papers, and obviously as part of these recommendations, it does talk about the councillor working group, councillor sounding board. I would like to have a show of hands to see if in general terms that is what councillors wish to have. Those in favour of that sounding board... Yes, Councillor Ring.
Sorry, Councillor Ring, if I could, Madam Chairman. In the action plan, we've identified there should be created, so it's new, it's not something we have at the moment. We want a sounding board of councillors so we can talk to you about communications, how you want to be communicated with, you can have input, we can talk to you about how the action plan is going. It's that role which should help with some of the issues that come out tonight, actually.
The question is how, if that is agreed, can I just see if people want that? Let's talk about its format later, but in general terms, is that something that councillors believe would be a good idea, that there's that input? Yes, hands, please. I'm not voting, I just want to know what people's view. Right, okay, so a straw poll. It is. The question then is how we actually constitute it and how it should move forward. Can I make a proposal? You don't have to agree it, but we could be here for hours discussing this. So could I suggest that it goes to the next leaders' strategic meeting for us to think of a thing we could do and then bring it back for, I mean, we could take it to our own groups, we could bring it back then to say, this is what we're proposing, do you agree? Hopefully that would actually stop us having hours and hours of debate here. Councillor...
Okay, the only problem with that is our next meeting is 10 o'clock on Friday morning, if you don't mind me pointing that out.
Don't mind pointing that out at all. But it's up to the group to say whether that is a way of actually kicking it off, is the way I would put it. Councillor Brown.
Would it be formed to put it through Democracy Committee?
Frankly, I don't think that's necessary. I really don't. I think if we can get... Look, I always get a little bit concerned that the political arm of the party, for a want of a better word, should operate alongside the committee system. So if there are issues like this, it is not unreasonable to take it back to our different groups and say, what do you think? And then it comes back and we can put all the bits together, and then it comes to committee with a reasoned debate about, well, I'll know where our groups stand. Hopefully Councillor Blackmore would have suggestions, and so would the smaller groups too. So if we actually have that discussion, we just take it to the leaders and say, have we got some unanimity here? And if we have, then we have a proposal to bring to the next committee meeting here and say, do you agree? It's a very simple, pragmatic way of moving forward.
We don't have to. I mean, I think going to the leaders' group meetings is probably a good idea. It doesn't have to necessarily be done on this Friday coming. It could be done the next one. Whilst the idea of setting something up here is obviously one of the things we've all said, we don't have to have it done in the next week. If it's done, if we've never had one in the past, if we get this done in the next couple of months, if necessary, whatever. That's fine. I would have thought there's no point in rushing. We might as well have a discussion, talk to your groups, come back, and then, move forward in December, whenever.
Okay. So yes, please, nobody's dissenting. We'll take it forward that way. I want to just say before we move to the vote that I actually sit almost opposite the comms team. What I can say is how all our officers work hard, but they never stop. No, I didn't say anybody did, but I think that there's been quite a lot of criticism made tonight. I'm not saying that's wrong. We were asked to comment on the papers, but I do think the message needs to go that they are valued because they work. All our officers work hard, but they never stop. And the issue of social media is actually pushing their workload almost through the roof. And that is a fact of modern life, I'm afraid. So this has been proposed with those amendments by Councillor Harper, seconded by Councillor Cox. Can I take it as, therefore, on page 98, there's recommendation 1, that the committee reviews and approves the Communication and Engagement Strategy 2016-20 at Appendix A, and 2, notes the update, and it is notes, the update on the 2015-16 Communication and Engagement Action Plan at Appendix B. Those in agreement with that, please show. That's 1, 2.
Actually, Chairman, I think you should take them separately, because I'm happy to note the second bit, but I'm not happy to approve the first bit. So I think they should be taken separately, please.
If that is what the committee wishes, I'm not going to reread it. We'll go then with item 1. Those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 8, 9. Was it 9? Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Any abstentions? No, I don't think so. And 2 notes the update. Those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Okay, how are we doing for time? We need to ask. Just before 10, we need to ask. Okay, so we've got a little bit. Right. Right, I was just checking the time because we're going ahead quite quickly now, I think. Item 16 is the report of the Deputy Head of Audit Partnership Risk Management, and that's your page. Find on. It is on page 132. Mr. Hevelston, do you want to lead us in, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and good evening, members. Thank you. About 18 months ago, the Council recognised it needed to improve its risk management arrangements, really to bring them in line with what is... Oh, sorry. In line with current practice and also to better manage its risks. So we revised the strategy and the framework document, which came to this committee back in July. and we've been working for the last year or so on basically implementing that across the council. As part of the improvements within that framework was how we communicate significant risks, both to senior officers and also to members. And it was felt that the risk management framework sat better within this committee as it has a much broader corporate overview, really, of what the key risks might be. So in February 2016, we reported our first update report, which was basically the result of a corporate externally facilitated session which involved members and officers around, well, what are the biggest risks that we're facing. So that's a bit of context really as to why this report comes here, but also this is only the second time that we're reporting risk. And so this is an evolution and it's a developing process, but we've been working over the summer to basically implement the risk management framework at both the operational level and the corporate level. And this is the output of that work, which is seeking to make members aware and members of this committee aware of what the most significant risks are that face the council. Now, there's two main streams for this. First off is the corporate level risks, and these will always remain on the radar. It doesn't necessarily mean that they won't be changing, but that's why they're in this report. There are 10 or so key risks at the corporate level which we should have awareness of at all the time. What is slightly different about how we deal with risks now is actually the escalation and aggregation of risk from an operational level. So you'll see for the first time we've got operational risks that are appearing in this forum and are having a potential significant impact and likelihood should they come into fruition. So for instance, things like the risk being faced by the housing service, they didn't feature on our corporate level risk, but you can see there at the operational level, the impact is just as significant. So as I said, this is a developing process. This is the first time that we've reported risk in such detail to members of this committee, but I think it's a really positive step. There's been great engagement along the way, and we will be seeking to continually improve this process to make sure the information we give you is valuable. And also, this isn't really a decision paper. This is to note, this is to give you some helpful information about risk. And then just in closing, really, just to kind of let you know where we're heading with this, there was a recognition when we last reported to members that we needed to work on risk appetite. It's a really important thing. It's been mentioned time and time again. And also the whole broader view in terms of the totality of risk, which is, again, why it sits with this committee. So we'll be doing some work with members and officers in November to start to formulate a risk appetite statement, which is basically saying, well, at what point are we taking too much risk? At what point do we need to start taking further action? And I think we've kind of seen it tonight. It would be great to have much more systematic reporting of risk and the implication of risk on the decisions that are being made across the council. And that's certainly the direction that we want to be moving in the next 6 months. We're also doing lots of work operationally in terms of how we work with service planning so that our risks at the operational level are directly connected to what we're trying to achieve, and also doing some work around communication, so how we make people aware of the process, because we are aware that risk management is quite subjective. We have got a process now, but we need to make sure people are actually following it. I'm happy to take any questions, and thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Councillor Blackmore, you indicated first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I did. I think it's quite interesting, bearing in mind it says under available options, there's no legal requirement on the authority to formally monitor its risks, which personally I think is completely crackers. Surely it should be a statutory requirement, because otherwise, private businesses have to monitor where their risks are, so I think we should. Don't know what to say, really. It's something we should do. I think it's sad we haven't been doing it for very long. Can you just confirm that this will be done every 6 months? And if that's the case, then I'd be happy to move the recommendation on page 132.
Yes, as agreed previously by this committee, we will be reporting formally every 6 months.
You're seconding, Councillor Ring. Right, thank you. Councillor Harper.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think what Annabelle Blackmore just said. I think one of the things looking at this, it sort of highlights some of the discussions we've had at council recently, doesn't it? Because if you look on page 142, the housing ones, the inherent risk on the top one is 25. And this is about homelessness, and even after your mitigating factors, it's still at 25, which, you know, ties up with the fact that we're overspending on the budget and all the rest of it, and the crisis we've got in the borough. Well, not just this there, is it? But then on that appendix on 142 is good, because it shows after the controls what you then feel the risks are, and clearly it enables us to then identify those ones where it's either black and it still remains black, or it only goes down to red, because even that is pretty awful. I mean, you know, where I work at the National Autistic Society, if we have any residual reds, the officers are likely to be disciplined or look towards being sacked, because if you're still leaving an organisation, you know, if we leave an organisation that exposed, and I'm talking about councillors here, that's our responsibility, isn't it, to address these. But on the other ones, on the corporate controls earlier, you've got the inherent risks, but you haven't got the mitigated ones after. And is that presumably going to come up in your next piece of work, so you can actually see how we're doing across the board? Because this is very alarming, and it needs to be seen, I think, when we do the budget, because we do need to, you know, if there's other issues here which are still mitigated at very high marks, we need to consider that as part of our resource allocation, because that's probably part of the solution, or not.
Mr. Heppelston.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the next kind of natural steps in this. The reason we haven't done it just yet is basically because there's been changes at the corporate level, and therefore to get a realistic grip on how we're going to respond to these risks, obviously we need the collective views of the CLT, but also at the head of service level in terms of what actions are we taking, and again, more importantly, that there is this broader view in terms of, well, what is the real impact. So I would hope by the next time we come back to you, we'll have much more of a, well, what are we doing, and how is it impacting or managing that risk? When are the budget discussions? Sorry.
I think Mr. Green should come in on that.
Certainly, what we would do as part of the budget process is do a risk assessment of the various proposals that go into the budget, if that helps and answers your requirement.
In particular, I think the ones which our auditors have highlighted here as what they consider the highest risks we're facing, we need to make sure these are reflected within the documentation we have for the budget, because otherwise we're sort of abdicating our responsibility when we look at, as I say, on that appendix for housing and homeless and some of the other stuff here. It's, you know, highlighting massive issues we're facing. And if our budget happily goes through with no reference to this, and then they come up and do another report and say, you know, what you're doing on it, and we just say, well, nothing for another year.
Yeah, certainly we would address the issues that are highlighted as the risk for the organisation as part of the budget process.
Councillor English.
If memory serves me right, Councillor McLaughlin can correct me if I got this wrong. Some of those issues that have just been raised are actually going to be addressed in some of the training and workshops that the Audit Committee has got in its work programme for this coming year. So it is happening, but perhaps in a slightly different place. I really like this report, but it's not that we haven't done as a council work on risk in the past, despite it not being a statutory responsibility. But what we see here is the whole process coming together and being much more coherent and robust and easier anyway to comprehend. So that is very welcome. One interesting thing that does come out of this is actually one of the big, and this follows on in a way from what Councillor Harper was saying, it's one of the biggest risks is actually being too risk averse. And when many of the challenges we face will only be addressed if we actually understand that risk management is about sometimes realising when you actually have to take or should take a risk rather than avoid one. I mean, I know it seems obvious, but many councils, ourselves included at times, do tend to think too defensively about the issue of risk management. It's not risk avoidance, it's risk management.
Thank you. Did you wish to come?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, and there is the opportunity risk, and it's an element that we want to feed into the framework once we start to embed it a bit more. One thing I did, just picking up or elaborating on a point there, I was meant to inform everybody we are doing a risk briefing just before the next Audit, Governance and Standards Committee, which is on the 21st of November, and that will be giving an overview of how does the Council manage and do risk management. So it's open to everybody. Obviously, we have members of AGS committee who come along quite regularly, but it is open to everybody, so I'd encourage you to come along. Yes, it's 45 minutes before the meeting, so about an hour before, so 5:30.
I have Councillor Ring and Councillor Bryce, and then I'm drawing to a close. Councillor Ring.
I think I'm just going to answer that question. I was one of the people that voted for this when it all started a few years ago, because, as Councillor English says, you don't have to be frightened of the word risk, but sometimes you have to take note of that end product. Now, if I'm not on this committee again, because I'm only a sub, I may not get that information. And it's interesting, I've read this, to find out that comes under the Communities Committee is the housing. So, again, I don't want to make work, but we did decide to have a committee system. So if that doesn't come to my committee, for all the members to have a look at, how would we know this is such high risk? We only go by our figures. So I think, Mark, we may have to look. We've got to treat the other committees with respect. If there's a risk getting high on that subject, they seriously do need to know.
Councillor Ring, can I say you will indeed know, and in the pre-meeting, when I was going through this with Mr Heppleston, I said there will need to be clarity about when Audit sees things, when P&R sees things, and when the service committees see the parts relevant to their remit. But if you wish to come in and say anything.
Just to reiterate, this is a developing process, and absolutely one of the next steps we'd like to see is the fanning out of those risks, particularly to service committees. And obviously we need to do that in conjunction with risk owners and how best to communicate those, but it is on the agenda. And then just picking up on the point about AGS, obviously they do have a role, and that's very much around the process. Does the council have a process to identify its risk? Content and action being taken is down to risk owners and the service committees to gain that assurance. But the AGS is very much focused on, well, how effective is that as a process? And then the council's response will be around the kind of matters that these committees will delve into, hopefully, in the near future.
Councillor Bryce, the final word, I think, to you tonight.
Well, Councillor Ring very adeptly made the point that I was going to raise, but I just wanted to add my thanks to this. I think it's a fantastic report and very clear and easy to digest. And I did note members Corporate 7 and Corporate 9 overcautious administration, not taking brave decisions. So that will definitely give me some food for thought. Thank you.
So I think the word is thank you very much. The report was a model of clarity, which helps everybody. Thank you to everybody who's come here tonight. We finished just before 10 o'clock.
Don't we have to vote on it?
Oh, we do.
We haven't done that. I did nominate it, or I did propose it. I think it was seconded, but we haven't actually taken the vote.
It was proposed, it was seconded. Yes. Sorry, page 132, to note it's not a decision. Is to note the key risks facing the Council and the measures in place for their management. Those in agreement, please. Yes. Are you voting? You agree to note. Okay, everybody is agreeing to note. That was unanimous. Thank you. So having said